So we are starting a new Bible study series this week, and we will go for a number of weeks, the normal length, kind of about 6 to 8 weeks of Bible studies and discussions. The topic for this series is, it's talking about race. There's a lot of ways to talk about that, a lot of ways to think about that. So we will cover both the good and the bad ways that race has been treated over the years, as well as be reading different Bible verses each week that speak to the issue of race, and talk about which of those Bible verses have been used in both good and bad ways as well. Hopefully I can invite some guests over the weeks, because if we're talking about race issues and racial awareness, then certainly it should not be that the only voice you hear speaking is a middle-aged white man's voice. So I welcome other voices and life experiences, so maybe we can get a guest or two to come in and help us learn in different ways and think about it more. And I found a good documentary made by a Baptist group that maybe I'll show during the final week of our series. Tonight will just be sort of an overview of things, both on earth and in heaven as well. We'll be reading from Revelation 7. If you want to grab a Bible and turn there, and I forgot to grab some extras. So if anybody wants a Bible to look at and read, you can raise your hand, and I'll tell Brian that there's brown Bibles right over there on that table. So if anybody wants one, they can raise their hand, and Brian's happy to give you one. So we'll do an overview tonight, and then kind of get into more details and more in-depth discussion in future weeks. But this issue, talking about race, it's worth talking about for multiple reasons. I think we all know, obviously, that the issue of race relations has been and still is a difficult one for our country. A lot of bad things have happened in the past when it comes to race relations. We all live in the South. We all know that there's been some bad times in the distant past, in the not so distant past, and maybe in more recent times as well. So we'll be talking about that, and we'll be talking about how, sadly, sometimes it seems like Christians and even whole churches have made things worse instead of better when they acted or they spoke out of a place of their own prejudice and their own racial bias. What's worse, if you go back and read sermons that Baptist preachers delivered, like during the Civil War, is when they would, in the South, Baptists in the South preaching during the Civil War, they would justify their opinions on slavery and their behavior using Bible verses. And they would pull God into their arguments, whether it was about slavery or segregation later, or just other forms of mistreatment. And when I would do historical research or read those old sermon texts, it would just rile me up so much. Not only was slavery obviously terrible, but the fact that they were using God as an accomplice for oppressing other people just made it, for me, extra terrible, just doubly terrible. Because when you do that, to wrongly claim that God is on your side when you're not on the side of righteousness, that is definitely taking God's name in vain, for sure. So we'll be talking about that over the next few weeks. We'll think about how biologists will tell us that genetically, all of us humans are pretty much the same on the inside on a genetic level. So no matter what our skin color is on the outside, every human around the world is the same on the inside. So things like skin color or pigmentations or different kind of physical features are just the ways that different populations around the world would have developed over tens of thousands of years to fit whatever conditions that they lived in. Like for me, for my physical condition, my skin gets sunburned really easily. I don't tan, I just get more freckles. I inherited that from my sweet red-headed mother, who inherited it from her red-headed mother, and her red-headed mother, and her red-headed father, like me. And now my red-headed sister and my red-headed sweet nieces. And also, I'm above average hairiness, you can see. So my ancestors must have been from a cold, gray, northern climate to have developed the skin type that I have. And I always wondered when I would do genealogy research and I would kind of track my family's immigrating over to America and moving into the deep south like 250 years ago, I just have to assume that when their pasty white skin experienced a summer in Mississippi and Louisiana for the first time, they had to think, we've made a terrible mistake. This is not the place that we were designed for. Oh no. But if my ancestors had been some other place, some other continent, some other country, then they would have different skin types, they would have different features. It's just a matter of where they came from. Then skin tones and pigmentations would be different. It's an outside thing. But genetically, we're all humans on the inside, no matter what our skin tone or color might be on the outside. So the idea of racial differences, that people being different, only has power if we give it power by our own prejudices or separations or us and them kind of mindsets. We let the prejudices that we've been taught or that we've learned set our vision and define how we see ourselves and how we might judge others. So instead of letting those very worldly perspectives, I'm going to call them mindsets of the flesh, guide us, let's first tonight learn from God and what God's kingdom should look like, and in fact does look like and will look like. So that's where the book of Revelation comes in tonight. So in the book of Revelation, John of Patmos receives a vision of heaven. And there's a lot of stuff that goes on in that vision. He sees a lot of things in heaven, a lot of different kinds of creatures, a lot of different kinds of people there in heaven. One group that he sees is specifically 144,000 people from the 12 tribes of Israel, 12,000 from each tribe. But then he turns around and he sees a whole lot more people in heaven. So let me read from Revelation chapter 7, verses 9 through 10. John says, after this, so after he saw the 144,000 from the tribes of Israel, after this, I looked, and there before me was a great multitude that no one could count, from every nation, tribe, people, and language, standing there before the throne and in front of the Lamb. They were wearing white robes and were holding palm branches in their hands. And they all cried in a loud voice, salvation belongs to our God, who sits on the throne, and to the Lamb. So when you hear those verses, and maybe you picture them as I do, what do you see? Or what do you hear from those verses? What are those verses telling you about what heaven, or what the kingdom of heaven is like?
A lot of different people, a lot of different nationalities, a lot of
Yeah.
different colors.
Yeah. Yeah, not just a lot of different people, but every kind of different people. All the kinds of different people that there can be, different kinds of different people. They were all there. Did it say that this kind of people was sitting over here and this kind of people is sitting over there, and then in the back is this kind of people. Didn't say that. Did it say some people got to sit up front and sing the special words, while some people had to sit in the cheap seats and they couldn't sing the special words? No. Everybody was singing the same thing. Everybody was praising God. So that is part of John's vision of what God's kingdom, what heaven looks like. In heaven, people of every country, of every race, are there together as equals, praising God in the same way. So that's what heaven is like. That's our standard. That's our vision. And if we mean it when we pray the Lord's Prayer, that God's kingdom would come on earth as it is in heaven, then that's what our goal should be. That should be our schematic, our blueprints, our model. Like when you put the puzzle that you've bought, you put the box, you stand it up, and you work the pieces, and you see how they're supposed to look. Well, this is our picture of heaven as we work to put all of the world's pieces together. And this is what our picture should look like. And yet, we have a long way to go. And in reality, the Christian church isn't just not leading the way, I think it's fair to say, in achieving this kind of vision, but it kind of seems like the church has usually been behind the rest of society. Like schools, workplaces, hotels, malls, grocery stores, they are all more integrated now than most churches are now. And that's why Martin Luther King said in the early 60s that 11 o'clock on Sunday mornings is the most segregated hour in America. And I was looking up that quote. I heard the quote, couldn't exactly remember who said it or when, but apparently by the time Martin Luther King said it in 1963, many other people had said it. It was one of those sayings. So he was giving, you've heard it said, this is one of those sayings. And I think it's kind of still true today, really. The times where I go to the grocery store or Walmart or Waffle House, I'll look around and I'll think, I wonder if this is kind of what the kingdom of heaven looks like in terms of the people who are here, more so than a lot of the physical churches that are around. So as far as catching and building the vision of Revelation 7 goes, the church has not only failed to really build it, but I mean, we know that too often over the years in the past, the church actively worked against it. I think I've told the story in a sermon before, how Cecil Sherman, when he was a professor of mine, he told the story of how contentious it was at First Baptist Asheville when a young black girl wanted to join the church, and how so many got angry and mad and upset and split the church. Just the fact that that was the case in so many places goes to show that we have quite a long way to go, or at least a lot of distance to make up. Like, I've been in some really old Baptist churches before. I like going to old Baptist churches and reading old Baptist stuff. In Virginia has a lot of really, really old Baptist churches, like 250-year-old kind of Baptist churches. And if they still have maybe their original building, then they will tell you that balcony, it was built, when it was built, it was called the slave balcony, because it was built before the Civil War, and that's where all the slaves had to sit, because they weren't allowed to sit with the rest of the body of Christ there together in the pews. And I have read old business meeting minutes from the 1800s from many Baptist churches. They would be in these big, tall ledger books written in pencil, And when they would list the membership roll, they'd list all the members' names, Bob Johnson, Francis O'Keefe, whatever. And then they would have a list of slaves. And it would be just first names because those folks really weren't deemed worthy enough to have last names. And it's kind of a powerful thing to look at that roll and think, some, Sunday school superintendent or the secretary of the business meeting just wrote those out, and you're the slaves in the church. And the building was built, and every Sunday morning for worship, that's how they gathered, and that's how they worshiped. And then after emancipation, it was very common for all the recently freed folks to go and start their own church together, and that's how a lot of the black churches in the South were formed, because they wanted a space where they could worship as equals and sit in the pews as equals, not as second-class citizens. So here's my next question for the night. Do we think it's okay that in most churches, even now, most people, whatever the church might be, most of the people in it kind of look and live relatively the same? And I think back to when we did like all the different denominations, and we learned about all the like the branches of the Christian family tree, and all those churches and all those denominations were started from a group of people who wanted to worship God in a certain way or a certain style that fit for them. And this was kind of their way, so they'd make a new branch. So should it not bother us that many of those differences in style as churches and denominations were formed, that they kind of fall along racial and cultural lines? What do you think? And I'm asking this question because this isn't a question that has a one correct answer. I think about this myself. Is that okay? Is it not? Or yes and no? What do you think?
If the white churches try to integrate, the white people have to learn rhythm and sing, learn how to sing.
And that would be very difficult for me, I would say, possibly for others.
Yeah, most of us.
And yeah.
My black friends at Carolina would have been bored where I attended, because I went with them a couple of times.
Yeah. I think that's fair to say, and I'm glad that they could say that to you, and you could receive it and go, yeah, I get that, that's fine.
Yeah.
And that's okay. I mean, it's okay to say, yeah, that church, it's just not my cup of tea.
I think that's how we were, our families brought us up. I think that doesn't have much to do with the color of our skin.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I think had my family been different, that if we had, a different kind of praise, I'd be more comfortable with that.
Yeah. I remember one time I was talking with a director of missions of a Baptist association, and he was talking about a group of folks in the area who didn't feel all that comfortable coming into, my kind of normal Baptist church. So they started their own motorcycle church, which is cool. And it was interesting for me to think about, well, they would have been totally welcome in my church, 100% welcome. Would they have enjoyed it that much? Like Ed and Ann's friends, would they have thought it was boring or kind of not their cup of tea? And that's okay. And if they need to have a cool motorcycle church so that they can worship full voiced, that can be okay. Yeah. Well, help me know about our area a little bit. I got here as soon as I could, in 2018. So you all know more about the area than I do. Think about the Christian presence in Weaverville, in Buncombe County churches. How would you describe how they are divided? Is it always kind of the old stereotype of black churches and white churches, would you say? What's kind of the layout of our area's churches?
Certainly have black churches, certainly have white churches, not much mixed that I know of.
Mm-hmm.
Motorcycle church, there's a motorcycle church
Where is it?
on the old highway, what?
On River Road near town?
Well,
Or,
what I'm thinking about is between here and, Forks Valley on the old road.
oh, okay, okay. I would probably stand out like a sore thumb at a motorcycle church.
Cowboy church.
Cowboy church? Yeah, where's their cowboy church?
They used to meet at the,
At the ag center, there used to be.
Oh, that makes sense.
Yes, absolutely.
Well, during the Industrial Revolution, railroad tracks joined areas long before the interstates did. And as the churches developed, if there were professional people and business people, they were on one side of the track. And the workers and laborers and farmers were on the other side of the track. So this side became the First Baptist churches. This side became the Second Baptist, which was, both of them were the same books. It's just that one lived on one side of the tracks and one lived on the other. And in a lot of towns now, that's still the case. There's the First Baptist and the Second Baptist.
Should we change that? Is there a way to comfortably change that? I don't think we can.
And that's a really good question, and I struggle with that question. You know, do we need to force people to go to a church that just isn't their cup of tea? Or, you know, is it okay that we're kind of separate in our little huddles?
And are we talking just Baptist huddles?
That's the ones that I know the best, yeah, but others have different denominational traditions that I can speak to.
I've been to a black church a couple of times, and I was very uncomfortable the whole time.
Could you say what that discomfort was about?
Well, you mentioned something about their singing, I couldn't keep up with that.
Yeah,
And I just not a real down home comfortable feeling.
yeah,
And I'm sure that's reversed.
yeah. When anybody, I think, goes into a worship setting or a church that's a different kind of style or makeup than they're used to, it's a little odd.
Episcopal. I've been to one of those at a funeral, and it was a little different situation.
Yeah,
Communion was the cup.
the one cup that everyone shares for communion. And how weird is that, right?
Well, I did it, but I didn't necessarily want to.
Sure, yeah, right, yeah, right.
But they would have been very used to it every week in the Episcopal Church. That's how they take and love communion.
Yeah.
And we're just not used to it. And when we were in Georgia, my coworker invited us to visit his church, an Episcopal church there in town. And I think that was my kind of first time as an adult to attend an Episcopal church and worship service. And there was discomfort. I felt that discomfort because it was different from the worship that I was so used to being in. And you had to kneel down, and then we had a booklet, and then do I say this part, or when we go up, and then there was movement, and just keeping up with all the choreography. There was I called it a spiritual discomfort, which yes, it was uncomfortable, but I was thankful for it. Because God forbid I only worship the Lord in only one way my entire life and never have the opportunity to experience worshiping the Lord in a different kind of way, whichever different kind of way. Certainly here in our little small town, we have, right here around Main Street, we can count 4 churches. Like Ray said, if it's a bigger town, then you might get a Second Baptist. If it's a city, you might get a Third Baptist. And I always wonder, what's the highest number Baptist church that's out there? Like, does Chicago or Phoenix or Houston, is there like an 8th Baptist church? How far do you go until you just give up the numbering? I visited Second Baptist Church in Richmond for a while, and seminary, great church. I have friends who pastor Second Baptist in Memphis, great church. Why they didn't want their own special name, I don't know. So in bigger towns, you might have more Baptist churches, but in our sweet little town, we've got the Baptist Church, the Methodist Church, the Presbyterian Church, and for lack of a better label, there's the Black Church that is down in the hillside area, which I've been told, I've learned, is historically the area of Weaverville where many Black families lived. Is that kind of a fair description? When I was doing research about our church, when we were going over kind of the history stuff, I found an article in the North Carolina Biblical Recorder from maybe the early 60s or so about a group of folks in our church went down to Little Mount Zion Church on Hillside and helped lead Vacation Bible School. And I'll go find that for next week. This is an interesting article for good ways and bad ways. So the title of the article, and I'll double check this, was, it was VBS in Africa. Because it was a Black church. And the folks at our church were white. And they went all the way, traversing such great distance, about a half mile, down Main Street, which says so much that even though the distance was tiny and walkable, really the social distance was so vast that it made the news in the state Baptist newspaper. And the pastor at the time was there, and I think his wife, and some youth helping the Vacation Bible School, and it was big news because it, at the time, it probably was a big deal for that kind of overcoming, breaking through barriers to happen. But very telling to kind of read the headline and read the article itself, and I'll make a note to bring that article because it's about us.
As a kid, which would have been sometime in the 60s, but a little bit later because, I'm trying to remember my family started coming here when I was 6, so that would have been 61 years ago, whatever year that would have been. 62. Little Mount Zion came here for Bible school when I was a kid. Because I remember being in Bible school with, all my friends, and there were not very many kids, but I remember
that. My children were.
the Cowans and
In the 90s.
all those kids that we grew up with.
Can you tell me what it was like? Just kind of a brief summary. I'd love to know more about that. And maybe one of these Wednesdays, we can have a time where we can all kind of learn together the history of our church and our town. But what was that like?
It didn't seem strange at all.
Good.
They were just a part of the
It
community.
was just, it was.
Yeah.
I remember a little boy named Bimbo that I helped with the 5 or 6 year old.
Bambi.
Was it Bambi?
I think his name was Bambi. And Gary Pinkley, who was a minister of youth, his little daughter came home and she loved him. He didn't know it was black till the next day.
But that's what I started mentioning was in the nineties, the school systems tried best to, elect theories. And it was so obvious that the area I was teaching in was almost perfectly racially balanced between the blacks and the Indians and the white, and the Hispanics were making a strong entrance. And I don't care how I arrange a classroom in little pods of computers or rooms or whatever, the different groups would sit with the people in their group. And I would try to mix it up a bit and move them around. The next day, it would go right back to the way it was.
Yeah.
The Hispanics were together, the whites together, the blacks were together.
Yeah.
And when they took breaks, during recreation time, it was the same thing.
Yeah.
And so, what you do, you can't force people to mingle.
Yeah, you can't force connections or force relationships, but it's so wonderful that you were trying to encourage it. And, even though you can't make somebody be a friend or, make somebody feel a certain way, you can at least encourage them and provide the opportunity. So that is great. And it's also understandable that, kids kind of naturally migrate into little huddles and, little groups. If, when I was in school, I didn't naturally go and hang out with the jocks and the football team. You know what I mean? That wasn't the crowd that I kind of naturally went over and hung out with, right? And so kids just kind of naturally, they'll kind of find their little group that's like them or that they feel is easier to connect with, that the potential for connections have a little less interference already. That you can just kind of make that kind of easier friendship. So that's where good teachers or good mentors are helpful to bridge that gap. So we'll be thinking about that in the weeks ahead. And again, for that question, there's no real right or wrong answer. It's just kind of thinking about us humans and how we tend to separate ourselves, but recognizing that heaven looks a different way. And I want us to keep that as our jigsaw puzzle picture box. That heaven doesn't look like the way that most churches in America kind of demographically separate themselves. Kids will do that naturally. But we are called to grow more mature than children. We're called to continue to grow up from our base human, kind of caveman child self into a true child of God. So that's what we'll be talking about this week and what has kept us from that, in what ways what things or Bible verses have been used to make that vision of heaven less of a reality in the world. So really important things to talk about. We'll go ahead and pause it there, and we'll keep talking and thinking next week. But I invite you to bring your stories and your memories, and already the ones that we've heard tonight. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much. So go in peace to love and serve the Lord, and keep a vision of the kingdom of heaven in your mind this week as we try to reflect that. So go in peace.